Well, hello everybody, thank you for coming. As Bob said, this is, over the past couple of years, my work has been shifting away from what it traditionally focused on, onto issues more related to affect, motivation, interest, self-efficacy, and so on. And this is part of a personal evolution, that I'm discovering more and more things about myself that I once took for granted, and realizing that I'm not the person that I actually thought I was, and trying to reflect my new knowledge about myself on how I see other people operating. So what I'm going to present you now is very much not well-baked. In other words, these are ideas that have been running through my head for the last 2 to 3 years. They're controversial. I hope they won't upset people. That's not my intent. And I would really, really appreciate critical feedback to show me where I'm mistaken. Because if what I'm saying is right, it means I really have to change many of the things many things that I'm doing right now are not going the right direction. So I'm really looking for feedback to show me, David, you missed this. Okay, it's really not the way you're presenting it. So why is it important for everybody to learn science? Traditionally, 5 arguments have been given. And these 5 arguments were put very concisely and coherently by Robin Millar back near the end of the last century. And he called them the economic argument, the utility argument, democratic argument, social argument, and cultural argument. I want to go over each one of these arguments, present verbatim what Robin said. And these are very, very this is a very widely referred to paper. So if you look at almost any article that talks about science literacy, science for all, and so on, these points will come up somehow as a justification why everybody should learn science. So I'm going to present his 5 arguments verbatim and critique them and show why I think they're wrong. Okay? And end up uncovering a different rationale why it is important for everybody to learn science. And I think it is important for everybody to learn. But my perspective in the end is very different from the one that is traditionally being presented. So the economic argument says, there is a connection, and again, this is verbatim taken from Robin's article, and many people around here know Robin. I never worked together with him. There is a connection between the public's understanding of science, a nation's economic wealth, and the steady supply of engineers and scientists needed to maintain the nation's economic standing. This is a graph that is often given to provide support for that claim. No, I made this graph, but I've read about it as an example, and I just couldn't find the actual graph, so I found the raw data and I built this graph myself. And basically what it's showing is the gross domestic product per capita, okay, compared to country scores on the PISA. And PISA, I assume most of you, if not all of you, know, it's an international exam that's given once every 3 years. Every country that's a member of the OECD has to participate inside it, and many other countries in addition participated inside this. And it's supposed to be a measure of adolescents' knowledge of science and ability to apply it in real-world situations. And in many countries, including Israel, where I come from, this is a very strong driver of what's happening inside the educational system. Countries are very interested in improving their scores and their standings, and they invest time and money in the educational system in order to do what they think will actually increase their PISA scores on the next test. So I took those from 2014, the scores. If you go to the OECD's website, you can get these numbers very easily on the horizontal axis. This information comes from the World Bank, also online, very easy to find. I took these 2 data and I stuck them together. And what we see that there is, okay, a medium correlation between the two. That is, okay, the wealthier the country, the higher the PISA scores, or the higher the PISA scores, the wealthier the country. Now, what is the cause for this correlation side here. I believe that although this is the way I remember seeing the graph should actually be drawn differently. And that is the horizontal axis, which is, okay, the predicting variable should be nation's wealth and the outcome should be PISA. That is, the wealthier a country is, the more it invests in its educational system, and therefore kids get higher scores in PISA, rather than the more kids know about science, the wealthier the country is. Because clearly, the kids who took these tests, they were 15 years old. Okay, this is done when they're 15 years old. They have no influence on a country's wealth. Okay, they're still kids. So clearly, this cannot be used to predict this. On the other hand, a nation's wealth can be used to predict kids' scores, because the wealthier the country is, the more it invests in education. I do not know of a theory that can explain how the knowledge of lay people should affect economic robustness. I've looked for it, I've not been able to find a theory that does this. I've not been able to find evidence to support the idea that the scientific knowledge of the general public supports a nation's wealth. Okay, to find data like that, first of all, there would have to be a measure of the public's general knowledge, understanding of science. I don't know of such a measure to begin with. So my interpretation of the economic argument that Robin laid out actually has to do not so much with the general public, but with those that will become scientists and engineers. Okay, in order for an economy to become robust and wealthy, you need to have many engineers and scientists, and they need to be high quality. So for my interpretation, that argument actually gives basis why we need to teach science to people who will become scientists and engineers rather than to the lay public. And to provide some support for my interpretation of this, here's another graph that I built. Okay, this over here, okay, is the number of scientists and engineers per million people for different countries, and this again is nations' wealth. Okay, we have an extremely strong correlation, 70%. 70% of the variance in a nation's wealth is explained by the number of scientists and engineers in that country, which is huge. The more engineers you have, stronger your economy. So, going back, when I look at the first argument, I think it does not say why everybody has to learn science. It says why certain people have to learn science.
Can you explain why the spread of scores is so much greater at the upper ends rather than the lower ends? Both the graphs you showed us, the cluster, right, it's been clustered nicely at the bottom and it spreads more at the end. And I'm just curious. This one's actually closer, but it spreads more in the middle.
There are countries like this, the high point over here, the wealthiest country, GDP per capita, is Switzerland. Okay, is this point over here. And by the way, there are 3 countries that I took out here that are outliers. One was Kuwait, okay, which is very wealthy because of natural resources, has nothing to do with engineering, and it's very small people, so it was way up there. Norway, for the same reason, they have natural gas, extremely wealthy because of natural resources. And the third country was Liechtenstein, okay, which is basically a tax haven for the very wealthy in Europe. Okay, so those were the 3 countries that just didn't fit, and I took them out. Now, why the clustering around a lot around here? You have a lot of countries that rule in the third world, okay? They don't have engineers, they don't have a way to educate people, okay? And they're very poor. And so there's a lot of points over here because there are a lot of third world countries, as I understand it, okay? And simply the further away you go from the third world, the variance between the countries becomes larger. It will spread out as you go away. Because, again, this is caused not just by engineering, this is caused by several other things, by your ability to educate your own engineers, to import engineers, okay? And by your natural resources that are available. They all play some kind of role. That's right. So according to the economic argument, the goal of science education before students decide which direction they want to go in life is to maximize the number of students that will choose science and engineering. It's not that we have to teach everybody, we want to teach people so that they will choose to go in an engineering and scientific direction, okay? Is that what's driving our instruction today? No, I'm not talking about the United States, I'm talking about the Western world. I think the answer is no. Okay, if we look at the measures that are used today to measure the success of an educational system, this is not a measure. This of course raises the question, then how and when do we know who's going to become a scientist and engineer? At what age do kids have to make this decision? Okay, so let's say beginning of high school, that's when the kids make a decision. That's the way it is in Israel. Okay, this means that until the end of middle school, we should teach kids so that the maximum number of kids who enter high school will decide to major in science. Okay, that should be our goal until high school. And then after high school, the kids who decide not to learn science, there's no need for them to learn science from the perspective of this argument. Okay, we should focus from then on only on the kids that are going to become, that want to become scientists and engineers. What happens if a kid chooses to go in the direction of arts or history or something like that? Is it too late? Does the system give people opportunities to switch over tracks? Or once you've made your decision, that's the end of it? Also, there are all these professions that are associated with science, but they're not really scientific, such as architects, okay, and technicians. Yes, the fields are based upon scientific knowledge, but the people do not actively use scientific knowledge in their work. Okay, so where they fit in this tracking, I don't know. So let's move on to the next argument, which is the utility argument. People can make sensible decisions regarding daily events, health issues, and consumer choices. Almost every paper I read right now, you open up a journal, it's mentioned, that's mentioned that the citizens of the 21st century need to be able to be these kind of things. And it makes a lot of sense, but the problem is I don't think it happens. Look at yourselves, and this is one of the things I realized many years ago, okay? How much does your science knowledge really drive the choices you make, okay? Think about that. When you go to the supermarket and you have to make decisions, okay, when you buy a car, how much does science drive your knowledge? Other than a rule of thumb, okay, that an electric car is cleaner than that, but you don't need science for that. These are rules of thumb that you accept. You don't really draw upon your scientific knowledge when you make decisions. Most of our decisions that we make all the time are driven by emotions and by instinct. And then we use our rationale to try and justify our decisions. So the intellect actually comes into play after the fact. And there's lots of literature from psychologists that support this. To give you examples, okay? How many doctors you know that smoke or that have unsafe sex, okay? Or that overeat, even though they know, they of all people should know that this is not good for you, but they still do it. How many people of us think of ourselves as environmentalists? We want the good of this environment, so yeah, we eat meat. And a report by the UN claimed that not eating meat or minimizing your meat consumption is the #1 most effective thing any person can do to decrease their impact on the environment. It's the greatest, it's more than driving a car, eating meat. In fact, grazing livestock, okay, and chickens is so contaminating, okay? And you would expect scientifically literate people to know that, and I assume that many people do that, but still we choose to eat meat. And I'm not saying, no, bad people, okay? Because I went out yesterday and I had fish, okay? Even though I know our decisions are not driven, okay, by our knowledge, they're driven by other things.
David?
Yeah.
The fact that, and I think that you chose certain examples that show that, but we can find other examples of people that are using scientific arguments to make smarter decisions or more better
I'm not
decisions.
okay.
But my question is, if this is the situation, then I think it's even something that will push us to put more efforts into science education, because you want to push people to having this.
My argument is people who are scientifically literate still do not drive their science. So what's the point of expecting lay people to do that? It's not fair to expect our students and people who are not scientists should draw upon their scientific knowledge in a way that scientists don't.
You can imagine how fat everybody would be if they didn't have their scientific knowledge. We'd be 10 times fatter. Right?
Okay.
See, I guess I disagree that people don't. I agree that these psychological aspects are also really important, and desires come in there as well. But I do think people actually do consider these other factors. It's just that they're overcompensated by the psychological things, right? So it's not that doctors.
It depends a lot on context.
That's true. I agree completely. And you see, it's having knowledge. It's not that knowledge is not useful. We do use our
Right,
knowledge.
but your argument
We just-
up there is that your argument up there is that we don't use our knowledge, and the fact of the matter is we do use our knowledge. Other things come into play, but we do use our knowledge.
No, you do not use your scientific knowledge. You use rules of thumb
No, that's not
that you've
true.
picked up. You do not, when you make a decision what to eat or not, analyze what's going to happen inside your digestive tract and how this type of fat and so. No, you have rules of thumb that you know that eating too much carbs is not good for you. That so on. There's a food pyramid. The whole way we make decisions, okay, in our daily lives and also in our is not based upon understanding of science. There are rules of thumb that are extracted from science.
There's an important exception to that, and that is that the marketers and food scientists who create chips and dips and other kinds of things very much are using science and impacting us in negative ways.
They're using the science in making the products. Is that what you meant? Or what?
In making the products and the flavors and tastes that maximize profit, right? And so therefore also maximize waistline.
This is not knowledge being used in everyday context. This is professional knowledge using knowledge in their
Exactly.
field. So that's what I'm saying. People who work in science, okay, I'm not arguing that they don't need to know science. In their fields, yes, they do draw upon knowledge. I'm a scientist. I draw upon science when I do science. Okay, that's not my argument at all. I think the argument that we draw upon science outside of our professions is overblown. Okay, and Joe's given an example here and Tom, okay, which I can argue with. I think it's up to the community if we want to base so much of our jargon and our rituals, okay, on this to provide evidence that this really happens. I have never seen, okay, a paper documenting evidence that people actually use science in their everyday lives. I know people that have studied, okay, how people interact in situations that they could have used, okay, scientific knowledge, and I will bring that up in a second. And one of their conclusions is that people do not use it. Okay, a paper by Glenn Aikenhood. I sent to you. I'll talk about a paper by Jim Ryder in a couple of slides. One of their conclusions was that people actually do not use science in their everyday lives the way we would wish them to. So I will be very happy to be convinced otherwise, okay? Because this means a lot of the stuff that I and my colleagues have been doing. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It may still be the right thing to do in the end, as we may see. It may still be the right thing to do, but the goal that we're aiming at, okay, I don't think is the right goal. And because if we have to shift goals, okay, it means that the ways we evaluate what we're doing, if it's successful or not, will have to change. And we may reach the conclusion that what we're doing right now is still the best possible thing, but for different reasons. Another thing about utility, technology. We always talk about the 21st century being technology rich and people have to understand technology and so on. This is nonsense. Technology makes the need to understand science even smaller, not greater. Okay, once upon a time, a car mechanic had to understand how a car works. Today, the first thing they do is they plug in an external computer that have a self-diagnostic program inside it, built inside, and most modern cars even have this already built inside the car. And the computer identifies which is the malfunctioning part, and you replace it. You don't fix anything. You take out the broken part, you stick the new thing. Think of the computer today, your air conditioner, your washing machine. They don't fix it. They don't troubleshoot. Okay, a computer tells them what's wrong, and they simply replace parts. The reason you need a mechanic or a technician to do this is because you don't have the parts, you may not have the skill, how to undo the things that put inside it. But anybody who has access to these diagnostic programs, okay, has the tools and good hands, can do this themselves. We don't need scientific knowledge. The whole concept of modern technology is black boxing things, making things idiot-proof. Plug and play. Plug and play means you don't have to understand to make it work. Chapman wrote about this in 1991, the overselling of science education in the 80s, already back then. On the other hand, we may be getting something else from our science education, which is not knowledge. It's something about our attitudes, our way of thinking. There's a philosopher by the name of Browdy from the University of Illinois talked about knowing with, which is basically the way you interpret situations, your sensitivity to different things. A person cannot. I've gone on walks in nature with a colleague of mine called Nir Orion, who's a geologist, and we walk along a wall of a cliff, and we see the same things, but we see different things. Simply the fact that Nir knows so much more than I do, he sees things that do not exist for me. I don't notice the different shades and the grains and so on. And so, although you do not actively draw upon your knowledge, knowledge does make you more sensitive. It gives you a different way of seeing things. And that may be an important part in one of the reasons why we need to teach science. Okay? It may be that people know science and they be more skeptical than other people. They want to see evidence, not that claims are not enough for them. Okay? So and those are utilitarian things, they're important things. Okay? But I would like to find out that this is true, that we get this. I don't know. I haven't seen evidence supporting that yet. The third argument is the democratic argument. To quote Robin again, it is the citizen's right to participate in debates on scientific issues, such as whether or not to obligate, to a vaccination regime. Now, it is the right of a person in a democratic society to participate in debates. No one's going to argue that. But just because you participate does not mean that you participate effectively, that you make a difference. And my question is two things over here. First of all, how much knowledge does a person have to be able to participate effectively in a debate? And secondly, okay, given the history of Western societies from the 60s, United States, Israel, and Europe, how much influence do citizens really have in the decision-making process? So I think it's a democratic ideal, but in practice, it doesn't really happen that way, even if you do understand what's going on. The idea of green energy has been around since the 60s in the United States, but it took 40 years till the prices of gasoline dropped enough, to make anybody willing to consider the other option. So what drove it was not public awareness of the idea. I remember this since I was a kid, growing up in Denver, talking about green energy. It's only when it became too expensive that people were willing to look for other options. And now that gasoline's prices are dropping again, people are moving back. The momentum is slowing down, investing in alternative energies. I'm just using this as an example. But beyond, more than that, in order to really be able to participate effectively in these debates, the amount of knowledge that you need, in my opinion, is way beyond what we can expect a person to learn, in 12 years of schooling. I was once at a debate which they talked about genetically modified foods, and they had two people up there, both really experts, in favor and against. And I was completely convinced by each person. When it was over, I could not personally, without perhaps going back and learning some more and studying and so on, I wouldn't have been able to really reach a conclusion for myself that I could justify. Because each of them gave very strong arguments that were convincing for me. Look about the issue of global warming. Look how many years it took for scientists, okay, to reach agreement that global warming is actually occurring, A, and that B, that it's caused by humans. And there are still quite a few dissenting scientists, okay, in that. So why do we expect non-scientists to be able to participate effectively in such things? It's a good thing. I'm not saying I'm gonna get it. The ideal is great. But in practice, I don't think it's a realistic thing to expect. Therefore, if we do want people to be able to participate in democratic arguments, our goal for K-12 science education should not so much be that they learn about all these things, because they cannot learn about everything. And even they know about today's crises, a new one's going to come up tomorrow, and they won't be prepared for that. What we need to do is to prepare kids so that they want to learn more, okay, that they're motivated, they're interested, and they feel self-efficacious about their ability to learn. You need those three things, okay? Just about every policy document today starts by talking about lifelong learning in science. For lifelong learning to occur, okay, people need to want to learn more and to believe in their ability to learn more. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Neither of these, okay, are explicit goals in our systems today. Kids are measured based upon their knowledge, not upon their desire to construct additional knowledge.
Is that measurement, is that from like the PISA test, is that what you?
PISA measures knowledge and your ability to apply. It does not, it has questions that I would say
not
are
true
probably
anymore, right, David?
connected to interest.
Right, that's not the current version of PISA though, right?
Right.
Current version of PISA is also going to consider social emotional learning.
Yeah.
Right?
Pardon me?
Current version is also going to include items on social emotional learning.
On interest.
Now you can question if that's really a good measure of social emotional learning, but I think it's more than interest actually.
It's more what?
I think it's more than just interest.
Maybe. Okay, I don't know. I haven't seen what they're doing. I don't know. The last question over here is: do people do not develop a sense of self-efficacy regarding science without being engaged with science? Self-efficacy is something that you develop based upon past mastery experiences. And so you have to learn some science in order to be able to be in a situation where you realize, I want more science, okay, and I feel good about myself in doing that. The question is then again, what science do you need to teach and how should it be taught in order to develop these tendencies? I mentioned Ryder before. He did a study of people engaged in all kinds of situations, suing a power plant for contamination, all done in England, not in the United States. And he analyzed what kind of knowledge people brought to bear, and when they did so effectively, whether the outcome was successful or not was not an issue. And he came to the conclusion that the most effective thing that seemed to impact people's ability to engage was not their knowledge of science, but their knowledge about science, how science works, how evidence is generated, about arguments within the scientific community, that these are not rules, okay? It's not that you do not prove things in science. You bring evidence to support things in science, and therefore they can be confuted? Conflated, right. And so that was what he felt was the type of knowledge that best supported people in the public domain. So the question is, can you develop knowledge of the epistemology of science without knowing some science itself? You probably have to learn science, okay, in order to reach that. But then again, what type of science do you need to know, and in what way should it be taught in order to help foster that kind of understanding? I don't know. But again, in this argument again, the goal of science education is different from the one that is presently held by most countries.
How is this part of the democratic argument you had?
Because because Ryder analyzed situations and where people were engaged in, okay, social situations, okay, such as examples of power plant, okay, or whether or not I have to immunize my child and I don't want to. So these were situations which were part of the public domain, and he tried to see in what type of knowledge did people bring to bear that made them successful in engaging in
decision
this.
making, not
Pardon me?
democratic. So it's decision making, not democratic. Because when you said democratic argument is about participating in debate.
Right. So, for example, he looked, for example, okay, at a court case that was one thing of a power plant, okay, and the way the people, okay, realize what evidence need to be brought, what evidence not, and so on, discussions they have with their lawyers and so on. So it was engaging, okay, in a situation that was dictated by present policy. Okay, so that's why I put it in the political thing. I'm going the wrong direction, sorry. Social argument. It is important to maintain links between science and the wider culture. Improving public understanding may lead to greater support in a scientific enterprise. Okay? So I'm not arguing that science is not important, not at all. And what this claims is that in order for science to continue to generate the knowledge and the wealth and the support for our lives that it does, you need a public support for the enterprise. So it's not that people need to know science, they need to be supportive of science. This doesn't talk so much about knowledge, it talks about attitudes towards science. I can be very supportive, and I am very supportive of some things about which I know nothing. Okay, so I won't say nothing, I mean, a sliver, you talk to me about neurosurgery. I don't know anything about neurosurgery, but it's very clear to me this is something important that I want to support. So again, this is very brief. I think the fourth argument does not talk about...
Your argument that you made before, David, was that you could take a walk with Nir, and that Nir would notice things that you would never notice because of his knowledge.
Right.
And now you're making the opposite argument, that it's possible to have positive attitudes towards science without having knowledge of science.
Right.
It seems a little contradictory, right? Because if you don't know what you're looking for, how can you be happy about it? So, or feel good about it. So it's a little bit funny. Either you have or you don't have it. I don't know if you can say both arguments that you're trying to make.
I'm thinking about the geology walk. That without a knowledge of geology, I think you still can have an appreciation for the beauty of that landscape, right?
But you're not going to see those things.
Oh, right.
You're not going to know the intricacies,
Sure.
right? So
Yeah,
you're not going to have,
absolutely.
you're not going to necessarily have positive attitudes towards someone who knowledge of science if you actually don't really understand yourself the intricacies that go into trying to figure those things out. Right? It's just like taking the walk, right? So when you take the walk and you can see all the different fossils and all the different striations, you need knowledge to have that. And while you might see the beautiful sunset, you're not going to see necessarily the color gradations that are come across on the striations because you're not looking for that. Same thing is true here. You're not going to have positive attitudes towards science without necessarily what it can actually accomplish both for you and for society at large. And the challenges that it takes to really try to figure that out. Anyways, I just see some
No, fine.
contradictions there. So I just thought I'd bring
Fine,
it up.
I understand. How should I place it? I disagree with you that you cannot appreciate things without understanding them. I think the greatest descriptions of sunsets have been made by poets who knew nothing about science, okay? Who knew nothing about science, and they were clearly enthralled by the sunset.
How do you know that they knew nothing about science?
One
It's not
second.
true.
No. So I'm saying you can definitely appreciate something very much without understanding it. The understanding it can add an additional layer of appreciation to it, okay? But it's not that has to be there, okay, in order to appreciate something. And in fact, if you go back and look at Feynman had a discussion exactly on the topic of a rainbow, okay, whether he could appreciate more or less, okay, than an artist. He talks exactly about that. And they decided to disagree. in the end. Okay, they left friends.
But
Okay, but disagreement.
we're not talking about art here so much as culture, right? And in many ways, the appreciation of science by non-scientists in the culture are reflected in our other cultural icons, in our movies, in our books, in our language, in our news reports, and those kinds of things, right? Can the people who are doing the movies and all of those other pieces that are giving people the introduction that makes them appreciate science, that builds this connection between science and culture, right? Really do that without understanding the science?
They need it. But then again, that's a professional job. This is
Okay.
not every day. I'm not arguing that that nobody needs science. Not at all.
But we
Not
live in
at
this
all.
socially connected world where most of the culture that people are getting is going to be from fellow citizens through Twitter and YouTube and other writings and blogs and those kinds of things, right?
Okay, so
So if you're going to build an appreciation for science and the principal vehicle of culture is from the average citizen, then the average citizen should need to know science, no?
it's interesting because I think historically, and I don't know if this is a good argument or not, historically, as we've gotten more and more connected, the appreciation for science has gone down rather than going up, okay? If you look back at the time of the great naturalists at the end of the 19th century and so on, there was wide appreciation and support for science, but nobody knew science except very few people.
So
Okay?
the other thing.
So I'm not so sure that that is actually what drives it. And again, you
No,
guys,
but that
one
was-
second. I want to make a point here. I'm not arguing against teaching science, not at all.
You're
That's
not
what I do
arguing
for a
against
living.
what?
That I'm not gonna. I don't want to spit in the hand that feeds me. Okay, that's not my goal. I just think that we're aiming at the wrong places, and that has implications. Okay, for what we do and how we do what we do.
I think this one's weaker than your other ones. So because of the disconnected nature, right? And historically, we all respected Edward R. Murrow and the main newscasters more than the man on the street, right?
Okay.
In our connected world, we don't respect those people as much anymore, right?
Right.
And as a consequence, we need the people who are constantly engaging with each other, which is the general citizenry, to become more educated if we're going to continue to pass that culture along, because that's where people are getting the culture from. So I think this one works against the argument that you're building, but keep going.
No, so your argument is that it's not that the individuals need to know some science in order to pass on the appreciation of science to
There's
others?
no filter here anymore, right? So you can go out onto the net and you can go grab the anti-vaccination
Right.
kinds of stuff, which perpetuates and undermines a culture that appreciates science. So that if you really want to,
By the way, I disagree with that. I know a lot of scientists that argue against vaccinations.
I don't know a single one.
I can show you some.
I'm sure there are some,
Okay.
but it's a matter of degree.
Right.
True, okay, but just because you're fewer doesn't mean you're wrong. That is one of the basic tenets of science. That democracy does not lead to truth. That is one of the basic things of science, okay? That things can be overturned by a single example that shows that what's wrong. So just because there are few, okay, it doesn't mean you have to run to their sites and believe everything that they do, but doesn't mean, okay, that they're wrong.
Can you define knowledge of science for me, just so that or is that the punchline at the end? Because you're going to have a different.
No, it's not. It's not the
So
knowledge.
when you use the term knowledge of science here, how have you been using the term knowledge of science? I get this sense right now that you mean it just the facts of science. Is that what you're just?
I mean it pretty much. I think I mean it pretty much the way it's been traditionally taught in schools.
Okay, so the facts, disconnected factual knowledge. Is that what you're calling knowledge of science? We would all agree with you up to now. That's that disconnected factual knowledge is useless. Go ahead.
I would add in the practices actually as well.
Disconnected practices,
right.
we would agree with that too.
Okay.
So disconnected processes, we definitely agree with that. Everybody agrees with that.
So maybe okay to talk about. Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out what you mean by
Okay.
knowledge of science. So one of your slides let me indicate that you're really not
Which one?
talking about knowledge and use. You're really not talking about deep functional knowledge. You're just talking about superficial knowledge that's taught in school.
No, I'm talking about deep knowledge because I think it's an unattainable goal. It's impossible
You're
to
talking
explain.
about deep, usable knowledge
when I
that
talk-
one can use to solve problems.
Right. When I talk about people who have deep knowledge, okay, and that they do not use it the way we expect people to use it, okay? I'm talking about deep knowledge. I'm talking about scientists who do not use science in making daily decisions that are not related to their profession. Absolutely.
Go ahead.
And again, over here, I can be convinced that there probably is some element of knowledge. Again, I don't really call knowledge here, that is necessary to develop a really strong attitudinal support of science. Okay, but I don't know what that is. It's much harder to support something that you know absolutely nothing about. I support neuroscience, neurosurgery, okay, not because I understand anything about it, but I understand what they're trying to achieve and so on. So I do have some sense of what it's about, and that seems to me an important purpose, so I support it. It's not completely that I don't know anything. The last argument is the cultural argument. Science is one of humanity's greatest achievements, and all people should appreciate it. Okay? But this is true not only about science, it's true also about art. Anybody know which picture this is? Sue does. I talked to Sue about it. Okay, this is a painting by Raphael called the Athenian School, in which he depicts here all the great philosophers of Athens, okay? And he uses faces of people who were living during his time who he felt embodied the philosophy of that person the best, okay? And also the postures and so on. The two people in the center are Plato, who's pointing up, about the ideal world and so on, and Aristotle over here was holding his hand out there, and there's a book, he was the scholastic one, and he was saying, not so quickly, okay, let's be more reasonable about over here. And this is one of the very first paintings that was not signed by the painter, because Raphael drew himself into the painting as one of the characters. That was his signature. This is an example, you just lock the picture, but by giving you some information, how having a bit of knowledge can suddenly enhance your appreciation of something. Okay, something that, like with you know a bit, and suddenly you see all kinds of things there. It's like, this is the opening page from Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. This argument says to me why we have to learn everything, not just science, because the argument is, as I said, is true about literature and art and music and so on.
David, you just made this argument. Sorry, I have to go back to this. You
Okay.
just gave this argument again.
Yes.
That just having a little bit of knowledge allows you to see so much more.
Right.
I totally agree with that. So I
Right.
don't get your previous argument.
I said a
If
little.
you don't have some knowledge, you just can't appreciate stuff.
STEM today is being taught at the expense of many other subjects. How many kids learn music in
Not at
high
the
school?
elementary.
Ask them.
It's the
Huh?
opposite.
One second. Okay, 1 second. Okay, how many kids, okay, are required to study
No one
music?
said not to learn the
No.
other stuff. I'm just trying to make the art. I'm just trying
No.
to understand your argument.
The argument also is that the goal that you're trying to obtain, why you're teaching it, is not that knowledge in itself is a value, which is what is today. If you look at the standards talk about knowledge in use. They talk about knowledge being used. They do not talk about affect. The rule self-efficacy is mentioned 0 times in the
Knowledge
standards.
induced.
Okay, the word motivation.
Knowledge induced.
The word motivation is mentioned 0 times. The word interest is mentioned twice. Okay, in the standards. Okay, and 2 times it's measured. It's mentioned as something that teachers should build upon, rather than something they should foster.
I don't think that's
so.
fair.
The point here is not that knowledge is worthless in something, but the reason why you want kids to learn stuff, they're different from the reasons that are given today. And because the reasons are different, the way you measure, okay, the success of the learning program, and the things that you choose to emphasize, and when you choose to emphasize them, and how you do that, they're different. That's my goal over here. Not that knowledge is not important, but it's important for different reasons that were typically given.
So in other words, one does not have to become a painter to be able to appreciate Raphael.
Exactly.
Or
Right.
to know the
Right.
practices of music to appreciate music.
Right. When you learn music, okay, there are no predefined levels of proficiency that you're expected to reach. Same thing with art. Okay? There are predefined levels of proficiency in science. And what this is saying, if the reason you're teaching the two are the same, okay, they should be assessed, okay, by instruments that are driven by the same ideas. Or perhaps they shouldn't be assessed at all. I don't know. Okay, but not proficiency. Anyways, to sum up the slides and then to end with a couple of questions. And again, you guys, I'm arguing with you, but my arguing is trying to convince myself, not so much trying, because these are things that are troubling me, okay? I'm not happy with what I'm saying here because, as I said again, it goes against many, many things I followed and believed for the last couple of years, but more and more I find myself over time leaning more in this direction, and hopefully you guys will be able to show me where I have misstepped. This is a summary of what I see right now, and basically the way I see it, each of these 5 goals points that the important thing about learning science, okay, are affective. Those are goals, other than the democracy thing, which I talked about, science epistemology, okay? The goals that are driving us are affective, and we teach content and practices in order to achieve an affective outcome, not as goals in themselves. That's my interpretation of these 5 arguments when they come. The bottom line, until students reach the stage where they choose their future direction, fostering interest, motivation, self-efficacy, and positive attitudes toward science appears to be more important than knowledge. Okay? Now, 3D learning may be an excellent approach to fostering positive affect, and I believe it probably is. But this has not yet been studied. So I'm not arguing that we have to do things differently than we're doing now. I'm just saying, okay, that the tools that we're measuring right now, the things that are driving us, and the way that we're measuring our success are the wrong things. And the conclusion I just mentioned is ignored by every standards auction that I know of in Israel, in Germany, in the United States, and England. Okay? Now research, part of it my own research, has shown that motivation, attitudes, and interests decline between 3rd grade and 9th grade. So that in 2nd grade, everybody likes science. Show me a kid that's not interested in science, that is a very strange kid. By 9th grade, okay, most kids do not like science. Okay, they may not know what they want to do and what exactly interests them, but they have a very clear idea of what doesn't interest them. Okay, by that time, and for most kids by 9th grade, science does not interest them. So something has happened between 3rd grade and 9th grade that we've killed something which is really important.
David,
Yeah.
I don't think that we've killed something between 3rd and 9th grade. Having taught quite a bit in 3rd and 9th grade, there's another factor that comes into play, and I think that's called hormones, and now my daughters have always loved science, they never lost that, but once boys entered the picture in this 3rd to 9th grade group, there may have been distraction.
Sure.
And I think with boys it's the same. I see a lot of focus, and blame the media, blame the culture, on male-female interaction, or, you know. So I don't think that we kill it. I think something else comes along to distract it.
It's a great point, and many people have raised it in the past. One of the things I've done to demonstrate, that it's wrong, is because there are school environments with boys and girls together in which their motivation does not decrease, even though they're interactive. Mm-hmm. So the fact that there are schools where you have boys and girls and hormones, and it does not decrease, means that cannot be hormones that are driving this decrease. It has to be something that is specific to the environment, because there are environments where it decreases, and there are places where it doesn't decrease. And there's some difference between those 2 settings that must be responsible for the difference in the kids' behavior.
I would say cultural.
You're probably right. It is something cultural, but that is something that we can control when we set up schools. And so when I say a school kills kids' motivation, it's something inside that school. You can call it culture, but the fact there are other schools where this does not happen, I hold the schools responsible.
Well, what about the parents, though? What about the home life? What about the boundaries that a school tries to break but can't because of parental defiance?
Of course, this is all influential. All these things play a role. to go back and talk about a study that we did that's been published, okay? There's a type of schools that are called democratic schools in Israel, okay? And in these schools, looked at many of these schools. There were 20 of them, a bit over 20 of them in Israel. Overall, we found no decrease in motivation for science between these ages. Now, you could say perhaps the kids were pre-selected in these schools because they came from families. So the answer is no. Actually, when we looked at their families were less supportive of science, okay, than the parents in other schools. All their attitude was, they basically sent their kids to these schools because for most of them, they had a bad personal experience when they were in traditional schools, and they said, my kid is not going to have this. So that was their primary reason for sending kids to alternative schools, and they just want them to have a good time, okay? They said, long as life, they don't have to study hard enough. I want them to enjoy themselves. That was the message that most of the parents gave, okay? They were not scientist background any more than parents in other schools. They did not support science. We interviewed quite a few of these parents. So we couldn't find a reason why the kids of these parents, because their parents should be any more maintaining, okay, the motivation for science. So to go back, I think it's something that the school does, the way science is presented and taught and expectations and so on.
So I just looked at my watch, and I noticed that it's 69 degrees outside. Now, we can all say, well, that's pretty cool, 69
It's
degrees
hot.
outside. It feels really nice out there, right?
Right.
And on the other hand, I would actually like people in the world, kids who are in our schools, to realize, it's not so cool to be 69 on March 7th or 8th. And it's not too cool to have 3 days in a row of 69s at the beginning of March, because we probably will end up with really lousy plants this spring, right? Because we're probably going to get a lot of blooming, and it's all going to freeze over, and we're not going to have a lot of our flowers. So I don't know where you want to put that in your list, but I think understanding the world and the factors that influence the world and influence what we experience is important for kids to have.
Why?
For just what I just said.
No, that's the reason why you said it's important for them to know that. You did not say why it's important for them to know that. That's what
Because
my
they
argument
can understand.
I'm not. Why is that important to explain? That's exactly what I'm trying to get at, Joe. I think I would like kids to know that also, but I want to know what having that knowledge versus other knowledge, what it gives them.
Well, so I think, David,
Other knowledge.
I think, David, one of the things you're doing, right, with Robin's categorization of these other arguments, those other arguments are public policy arguments, right? They're justifications for funding science and science education.
No, I don't think so. I think the first one is.
Absolutely. They show up in every argument, in every article, and every call
That I would
for
use.
more funding for sciences and science education. Right? Joe just made a very different argument. Joe made a personal engagement with the world argument that's not focused on public policy, right? That's focused on the individual development and individual learning. That's a different piece, right? I agree with you. Some of the public policy arguments are artificial, right? And you know that because all these public policy people do is grab these things and shove them in up front usually without that much change or thought. And I think critiquing those is a totally reasonable thing, but it's not quite the same thing as saying that engaging with the world with a scientific epistemology isn't individually enriching.
And that's what we've failed to do. I would go further that if people would understand what's so bad about being 69 3 days in a row at the beginning of March, that indeed when it came to a choice of should I now buy this big car for $50,000 or stay with my small smart car, you probably would get some different decisions.
Okay.
Or maybe more people would try to consume less meat. Maybe not stop it altogether because they might be a little worried about how they get some proteins, but they might consume less, right? So the point is we never really engage people. I like that phrase, Bob. Thank you for putting my thoughts together. Engaging in the world to figure out phenomena that are really important to them. It's not what we do.
Okay, you said two things, Joe. That you want people to know that it's a problem that it's 69 degrees for a couple of days at the beginning of March, and because of that, they will eat less meat. Okay, or they won't buy a big
No,
car and so on.
no, what I said was that we need to focus on engaging kids in understanding the world in which they live, right? So why do we have these cycles of temperature? What's it's great to run around outside today, right? I mean, if I was young, I'd be playing a game of football today, right? But there is some issues, right? The same thing happened to me back in December. In December, I was in Washington, D.C., and everybody was all excited that the rose garden was blooming. Well, in fact, that's a disaster. It's a disaster, because the roses won't bloom this spring then, because they already bloomed. They used up all their store of energy. And if we can get kids to understand that's how that cycle of energy works, because they're going through photosynthesis and plants can only do it once, I think it'd be great, because they understand the world in which they live in. And that's going to help them make really important decisions, perhaps. But the point is, we don't educate kids in our classroom at that point. We just basically give a litany of facts, and they can't tie things together.
Plus, those things also are going to be motivating, right? If you understand what's happening with the roses in the rose garden, right? Then you start looking for those things, right? And I would argue that increases engagement and self-efficacy.
I have a question, David.
Yeah, sure.
As an accountant,
Sure.
maybe I'm reading your questions. So are you saying that, not these questions, but just the overall. So as an accountant and over 50, someone shouldn't try to teach me new science, or I shouldn't try to learn learn more and engage myself in to understand more science?
Not at all. Not at all. What you decide for yourself, that's great. I'm talking about decisions that we make for other people, not a decision that you make for yourself. If you want to go into science, of course it should be available and possible. I'm in favor of free public post-secondary education. Okay, so not at all. I'm not arguing against, and again, I'm not arguing against knowledge at all. I'm just my case, and I think I'm hearing something interesting over here. Okay, is that the reasons that have been given in the past why it's important for people to learn science, I find that they don't really.
But Bob made a really
carry their weight so
important.
much.
Those are political
Okay.
documents, right? Those are political statements. The reason why you don't see them in the NGSS is because it's a political document, and the document never would get passed with political statements in it.
But that's what people are using to guide their work and justify their work. Do I meet this PE by 4th grade? It's insane, okay? Measuring kids in 4th grade, whether they reach certain predetermined performance excesses. That's the way to kill kids' interest in science.
No, I don't know. I mean, I like your first question. I don't know what you mean by effective outcomes, right? And I think
I want a kid when he ends 3rd grade to be waiting for the 4th grade science class because it was so much interesting and fun. That's what I want the kids
Sure, we
to
all
be
see.
doing, not regardless of what they learned.
Sure,
Okay?
this is the issue, right. No one's denying that we want to increase kids' motivation. I mean, the reason I asked you about the effective outcomes, I also want to have kids feel like, oh, I can really figure this out. I have a capability of going to figure out what's going on here. I can make a difference, I can figure this out. And that's a little bit different than I just want to just go learn more, right? It's more, I can learn, I can figure it out, rather.
I can figure out. That's self-efficacy.
To me, right. So that's why I was asking what you mean by effective outcomes.
I'm talking about that kid's belief in their ability, okay, to grapple with ideas. But that's an affective outcome. It does not depend upon what you actually know.
So I think there's a really interesting piece here, right? Because most of us who are educators, I think at some level, like Joe or myself, right, we care about these individual kid outcomes. The public policy argument is different. The way you convince, people to give you more money to do that sort of thing, at least in the United States, and I don't know how it is in Israel, right? But it turns around.
It's exactly the same.
It turns around these other issues, and to some extent, those are artificial arguments, right? And they're false. And when they drive things too much, like perhaps when they're driving lots and lots of standards and testing and whatever, they're perhaps counterproductive to our real underlying goal, as I think what you're saying, right? and maybe it's a statement that we should stop making spurious public policy arguments because they tend to take us off the rails. And maybe it's a case that, but I think it becomes hard to make those arguments to folks who aren't engaged with kids on a regular basis. The people around the room are engaged with kids on a regular basis. We care about individual kid outcomes and affective outcomes and those sorts of things. But you go to the governor of Michigan, right, and he's the one interested in these gross economic arguments.
So why not make it there as well?
Well, so the question is, how do you frame the kid-centered argument in the gross economic terms that are driving the decision-making at that level? Right.
David, I don't want to kill this argument.
You have to-
because we have to go. So,
Sure.
thank you for the
Sure,
nice-
no problem. Great. Well, thank you for coming and.
Keep up the argument. Someone fight more. Who likes to get pushed on?
So we are at the conclusion of our hour, although I don't want to cut anything off in particular for those who want to kind of continue to engage with David. I think one of the things that our international scholars in particular bring to us is a perspective that we don't always have in the United States, and that challenge some of the fundamental assumptions both in policy and other areas that really are having big impacts, positive and negative. We certainly can say that for the period of No Child Left Behind, for example, we conducted a large uncontrolled experiment on a generation of students in the United States that was a failure. And we need to challenge ourselves to avoid making those kinds of mistakes again. So without further ado, we'll let people take off if you like. David is staying around.
So I'm ready.